which is based here in Nashville, Tennessee. We provide education, support, and advocacy to families impacted by incarceration. Free Hearts does. And we're located actually in North Nashville, inside of Magruder Family Resource Center. We work with families that are here, and we mostly focus on moms and kids. So we know African American incarceration very well, as I also am a formerly incarcerated woman. So. The National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls is actually a national organization that's based in Boston, and Clemmy Greenlee actually brought the organizational chapter down here and introduced the National Council to Nashville. So, yeah.
And so this organization, what is this organization all about? And why don't you talk about some of your own personal experiences, your background, education, and how you became involved with not only this organization, but say something about your earlier experiences and where you might have gone wrong in your own life in reference to leading you to where you were.
Okay, well, starting off with my education, because I'm born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in other places, but I was born here in Nashville, and I went to Hume Falk Academic Magnet High School right in downtown Nashville. I went to Middle Tennessee State University. My first degree is in recording industry with music business, and my minor was in public relations. And I have a master's MBA in information technology, and I'm working on a PhD in public policy right now. And the way that my path to incarceration may not be the same path to incarceration of other people, because I was already actually in my career. And I was working in the music industry, and basically in my situation, I just was unaware of the laws in another state, and I took a firearm that I had registered and permitted here to another state, and I declared it at the airport and everything, but was unaware that the laws were different in that state, and ended up having to do a year on Rikers Island as a result. Never living in New York, from Nashville, Tennessee, and that was my path to incarceration. Everybody's path to incarceration is different, and when people are like, okay, you did the crime, you did the time, one thing I know, there were so many brilliant women that were in there with me that may have made a wrong choice, may have had a mental illness that was was not being addressed for a long time, may have had an illness such as a substance abuse or other illness that was not addressed, and that was their pathway. So everybody's pathway is different, and just looking at, sometimes it's not always what you did wrong to get to that point, but just, it could almost happen to anyone. You really never know. And so with Free Hearts, what we do here, we provide, again, support, education, advocacy to families impacted by incarceration. For support, we do support groups inside the schools. We do for children whose parents are incarcerated. We do support groups inside the jail, the women's jail. We have mentors inside the prison. We do case management for wraparound services. We also teach parenting classes for people that are trying to reunite with their families. And then we have the Nashville Participatory Defense Hub, where we're organizing families of people, loved ones who are currently facing charges, to help them to impact the outcome of their cases. And we have a storytelling for public policy program, where we have our first bill that's been introduced in this session with bipartisan support, Representative Gilmore.
Okay, let's take this break right here, Ms. Harrington. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Ms. Dawn Harrington, and the issue is African-American female incarceration. And Ms. Harrington has already given us some excellent information in reference to her situation. And now, Ms. Harrington, let's see if we can talk about African-American females in jail.
Okay, well, first of all, African-American females are incarcerated at a rate three times more than that of white women. And so it's disproportionately impacting our communities, you know, more than other communities, first of all. And so that means since most women have a child, women that are in jail have children, that means that a black child, an African-American child, is 7 times more likely to have a mother that is incarcerated. So, you know, it's just impacting us more. When I go into the jail almost every week. When I go in, you see mostly faces like my own, you know, that are in these jails. And so, you know, it's just something that has always impacted our communities. It's impacted our men, and a lot of times we don't think about the women. A lot of times we don't think about, you know, this is also happening to our mothers, our sisters, and I can tell you that it is. Women are incarcerated at 700 times more than they were 20 years ago. So whereas it was mostly, when you think about somebody that's incarcerated, you may think about a man, but women are being incarcerated way more, you know, and are outpacing the rate that men are being incarcerated at this time. And black and African American women are at the front of.
You mean there are more African American females incarcerated than male African Americans overall?
No, it's not more African American females than males, but it's just the rate that we're being incarcerated because there's still a greater number of men that are being incarcerated than women, than African American women that are being incarcerated. But the rate that we're being incarcerated is more than it used to be. So they're kind of going at the same rate, but now they're incarcerating way more African American females now than they were.
Well, what are some of the challenges that African American females face that are locked up?
Some of the challenges that African American females face include having the resources for like commissary, having transportation to get their kids to come see them, to come visit them, and it's important for families to be able to connect with each other. In fact, they're about to take out face-to-face visitation out. First, they're starting with the men's jail, but they're also about to take face-to-face visitation out of the women's jail as well. And so basically, when you go to visit your mother in a jail, you're going to be looking at her from behind a tablet. You know, you won't be able to give her a hug. You won't be able to see her, and you know that is. It's unconscionable that we would be doing that in our city.
No touching, no
exactly.
Between the person who's incarcerated and the person that comes to see them.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, specific to African American women, more of us are in jail not because we have been convicted of a crime, but because we don't have the money to bail out of jail. And so, you know, that's something that is impacting us more, because you would think, okay, if a woman is incarcerated, if we have a woman in jail, then more than likely they did something. But most likely, women from our communities, more often than not, are just sitting in a jail because they don't have the money to post their bail to get out and be able to fight and, you know, actually be innocent until proven guilty.
And so no matter what the charge might be, that essentially African-American females generally end up being charged and placed inside of a jail rather than given an opportunity to bond out. Is that what we're saying? Exactly.
If you don't have the money, and you know, I've seen a lot of these bails with the participatory defense that we do, you know, some of these bails are ridiculous, you know, and if you don't know exactly how it works, just say if it was $300,000, you have to come up with $30,000, or you have to put somebody's house up or something like that to be able to get out of jail. And that's just to be able to prove your innocence. And, you know, it's a matter of resources, because just because you don't have the money to get out of a jail doesn't mean that you are less or more guilty. But our communities, the African American communities, more often than not, we're just sitting in a jail because we don't, until we go to trial, because we don't have the money to get out and bail out.
And so whatever the offense might be, if you don't have an opportunity to bail out, you have to wait until it's time to be charged and have the court hearing. Is that what
right? You have to you go back and forth to court. So I mean, you might have 8 court dates. You know, you might go. One of the moms that we work with, the witness or the person that was supposed to see what happened, they haven't showed up. One time they didn't show up, they continued it for, you know, another month and something. Then another time they didn't show up, and they're continuing it again. So it may be not only just one court date, it may be several different court dates. And in fact, we have one African American mother that is, she was in a program and she finished her program and she can't get in touch with her attorney. And now she's just sitting there waiting for, hopefully, for him to reach out. And so, you know, a matter of not having the resources, you know, that makes a big difference of whether you're just sitting in a jail and away from your family, or being able to be with your family while you work through this issue and get to the bottom of it.
Well, would you say that there's something between the criminal justice system and the bonding agency? Would that be proper to say?
Yes, actually there's I would like to mention Jacola Lane with the Nashville Community Bail Fund. And, you know, they're doing some great work in trying to, with people with lower bails, trying to help them to get out. And really to show that, to use that as evidence to show that just because you don't have the money doesn't mean that you're just going to run off and not go to court. You know, and that's showing different, that's showing, you know, priority to different communities that have more resources.
Very good. And of course, what we'll do, Ms. Harrington, is to take our second commercial break, and then we'll come back and give you an opportunity to talk for about 10 minutes about any topic dealing with what we're talking about here. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Ms. Dawn Harrington, and she's given us some information relative to African-American female incarceration. Ms. Harrington, let's see if we can, during this last 10 minutes, give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that you would like to make sure that you leave with our audience this morning dealing with the topic that we're dealing with.
Okay, well, one thing that I want to leave our audience with today is for our city claims to be very committed to survivors of domestic violence. And one thing we know that Tennessee is very high for domestic violence homicides in comparison with the country. And speaking of African American women that are incarcerated, we have one woman that we work with, Shantonio Hunter, who right now is being prosecuted by our DA for the actions of her abuser against her child. And actually her trial's coming up next week. That's why this is at the top of my head. And our DA she's African American, and they gave her a plea offer, which is a plea agreement offer of 30 years at 100% for killing basically her child when she never did it. Her abuser that was also abusing her, you know. And another case that is exactly the same profile, but the woman was a white Caucasian woman, and Nina Costanza. They gave her a plea deal for 20 years at 30%. So 30 years at 100% for an African American woman, or 20 years at 30% for a white woman. And just don't get me wrong about this. I don't feel that any woman should be prosecuted for the actions of their abuser against their child. I think we need to help them to heal. I think we need to help them to give them support to heal their lives. You know, they've already lost the greatest thing they can by losing their child in this whole situation. But to prosecute them, you know, is insult to injury. But with that being said, for an African American woman to be, you know, offered way more time and for them not to give her a better plea deal just because she's African American, you know, it speaks volumes to what is going on in our city.
Well, more specific, she's charged with a murder that her abuser committed. I mean, how does that work? I mean,
you tell me.
That's the thing.
You tell me. And that's why I highlighted that. But like I said, neither one of them should have been charged.
No, okay.
And yes, let's go back to that, because it doesn't make sense to just like you're saying, it doesn't make sense. And she actually has a trial next week, and you know, I saw the DA Glenn Funk in California, because several community members have signed on to a letter that we don't feel that this is you know, is just for her to be charged with the murder of something that they even have been saying in court they know that she didn't do. And he said that he would give us a meeting when I saw him in California, and this was in June, and we've been calling, and community leaders have been wanting to talk about it, but you know, we haven't been able to get him.
Well, let's see.
That.
Do you know any of the facts on the case? I mean, how do you know that it was her abuser who committed the murder rather than herself? I mean, talk about it from that perspective.
Well, actually, I've been coming to the court, and even, you know, in open court, the judge clarified that, you know, so we're not saying that is anybody saying that she did anything to the child? And the DA said no, they're not. But it's a policy that domestic violence advocates across the country are called failure to protect. So it's when prosecutors prosecute people for not for the action, but they're prosecuting the same as if you did it because you couldn't stop it. But to me, to charge somebody that's also being abused themselves and that has survived the abuse basically just for surviving it, because you could have easily been the person that ended up, you know, deceased.
Well, what about the man who is responsible for the death of the child? I mean, she might have...
Well, he is already, in this situation, he's already been convicted.
Oh, so they convicted him.
Yes.
And then they're convicting two persons for the death of that child. Is that what we're saying here?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And so you... And so you're saying that there's a policy that allows that?
Yes, and you know, our city is supposed to be committed to survivors of domestic violence, and this is the second case in a couple of years that has been prosecuted by our city that's along the exact same profile. But the difference with Shantonio Hunter is that she's a black woman and that she has a public defender, not a paid lawyer. And so her outcome, you know, even the offer that she's given is totally different. So
is there a difference, you think, between African-American females and other individuals in terms of the plea bargain that they're given, or that some are given more harsher, longer terms? Do you find that to be true?
Yes, I definitely find that to be true, and Shantonio Hunter is a perfect example. You know.
But you find that to be generally true?
Yes, I find that to be generally true, and this just is one illustration of how that is true. Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
Yes, I do find that to be true. So, Yes.
Well, but there's no recourse. I think you mentioned having spoken with the district attorney in reference to this particular case?
Yes, and many community members have wrote him, and when I saw him in California, he did say, he's received a lot of the letters and different things, but he said that domestic violence doesn't excuse you from everything. And I really don't see where he's coming from with that, but to me, this is just unjust. It's unjust, and many community members want to speak with him about it, but we're still waiting on a meeting. So.
And so there's a possibility of her being charged with murder in a real sense.
She is being charged with murder. She's being charged with murder.
That she did not physically commit.
Exactly.
Well, now, how is it that she could have protected this child from being murdered otherwise? I mean, what's the
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't understand. To me, it doesn't make sense.